President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived in Germany for the G7 Leaders Summit, which kicks off tomorrow. Germany has indicated that it will seek to strengthen the G7's responsibility for working towards the global common good. But what does this all mean? eNCA correspondent Olly Barratt has more from Bavaria. Olly, thanks for speaking to us this afternoon. What's topmost on the agenda of the G7 as they meet tomorrow?
Well, there's a raft of issues that G7 leaders want to get to, and actually the G7 summit is underway already. President Ramaphosa is in Germany. He's in Munich at the moment, not here in Bavaria yet where the G7 is happening. He will take part in a dinner this evening, which is being hosted back in Munich by the Bavarian leader for the heads of state and government that are here. And then it's on Monday that President Ramaphosa's contribution really starts when it comes to the G7 summit itself. Today at the G7, the key themes are these for the three sessions that leaders are taking part in: the global economy, the cost of living crisis as part of that, infrastructure partnerships and investment, and foreign and security policy. And of course, foreign and security policy, that session will relate in a large part to the Ukraine crisis. Over the next couple of days as well, there'll be more discussions about Ukraine, more discussions about food security, more discussions about potential further sanctions against Russia. They'll be talking about infrastructure again and the economy. There is lots to get through. Health is one of the topics too. That relates to COVID-19 and strengthened commitments that G7 leaders want to see to the World Health Organization. So it's a very, very busy agenda indeed here in Bavaria.
Olly, South Africa is one of the non-member states taking part in those discussions, as is India. Their Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived a little bit earlier today. And both South Africa and India have just been around a virtual table meeting with Russia as part of BRICS talks. Do you think that affects their standing at the G7 summit?
It's a very interesting dynamic, and South Africa and India and Indonesia, Argentina as well, Senegal, the countries that are being invited by Germany to this G7 grouping are being invited because they're considered to be large and stable democracies, and the G7 wants to promote its contribution and collaboration with democracies around the world. But with Ukraine and Russia so dominant at this summit, as I say, it's a very interesting dynamic indeed, and we may well see South Africa and India coming under some pressure behind the scenes, I think, to take a slightly tougher stance when it comes to Russia. But the opposite applies as well. The other side of the coin applies as well. Senegal and South Africa are very much, we expect, going to be pressing leaders here to do more to open up the flow of grain from Ukraine, to get it into parts of the developing world that rely on those supplies so much for their food supplies. And some countries in Africa have been complaining that they believe that Western sanctions are actually really having a very harmful effect now on food supplies getting to Africa. Now, leaders here, the G7 leaders here, would dispute that entirely. They say the problem with Ukrainian grain is a result of the actions of Vladimir Putin, and they effectively believe that that is a Russian propaganda message, that it's the Western sanctions that are having this effect. So the Ukraine issue is a controversial one here because even the G7 leaders don't see eye to eye on all of this. Boris Johnson, we know, is trying to pressure some of the other G7 leaders here, particularly France and Germany, also to take a tougher stance when it comes to Russia, its invasion of Ukraine, and whether there should be peace talks anytime soon and what form those should take.
Olly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made a virtual appearance at many gatherings of world leaders over the past couple of months. Do you think there's any expectation that he would send a message to the G7 leaders at this summit?
Well, we expect that the message will be essentially the message he's repeated, as you say, at summit after summit and meeting after meeting in recent months, which is that he wants the continued support of the international community, and he wants that to take the form not just of financing, but crucially of the continued flow of weapons and, importantly, heavy weapons to the Ukrainians, so that they can not just defend their territory, but actually push back. And that flows into that dispute, really, that difference of position that I was trying to outline earlier between France and the UK, Germany and the UK. Number 10 Downing Street is worried that the French and the Germans are perhaps minded to try and encourage Ukraine to give away swathes of its territory in exchange for peace. And the UK and the US position is really that that shouldn't happen, that Ukraine has to be given the tools to win the war against Russia, to push back in some of those places where Russia has taken territory since it invaded on February the 24th. So again, another example when we hear from President Zelensky of light being shone on the differences and the divergences between some of these leaders here at the G7. But when we get to the end of the summit on Tuesday, we do expect that the G7 leaders will try and issue some kind of communique, which they will hope demonstrates to the world that actually they've come to a unified position over Ukraine in the few days they've been talking here.
Olly, last question for you. High cost of living is a problem across the globe at the moment, many countries struggling, and that can't all be heaped on the shoulders of this Ukraine-Russia conflict. What do you think is going to come out from the G7 discussions around financial policies going into the future in terms of solutions?
It's going to be very, very difficult indeed to find solutions. Certainly those discussions are taking place. It's a problem that affects every single country that is here, but also many, many more around the world, as we know. And it's easy for those discussions to take place. It's easy for leaders to express concern about the cost of living crisis that they're seeing in their own countries. Much, much harder to come up with any kind of plan here at the G7 that can have a meaningful impact. And that is sometimes the criticism of this grouping, the G7, is that they can have their summits and they can express their unity and they can try and seem like they're on the same page, but sometimes the action doesn't flow in the way that leaders here promise. And that's a criticism that can be levelled at the previous G7 in Cornwall in England. Some of the commitments that came out of that haven't really been followed through. Now, much of that is to do with the fact that after the G7 in Cornwall, we saw the invasion of Ukraine, and that has very much changed the calculations with regards to so many geopolitical issues. But leaders will be doing everything they can to try and come up with some solutions to those problems.
Thank you so much, Olly. That was eNCA correspondent Olly Barratt coming to us from Bavaria, where the G7 summit is currently taking place.